We will see in this time map the evolution of life expectancy at birth for women on national averages from 1961 to 2020 in 5-year intervals and the averages of those 5 years periods. So in 1961 to 1965, this is how the world looked like, with huge differences as it happened with life expectancy in general and with life expectancy in men that we saw before, with some countries with life expectancy as low as, for instance, in Sierra Leone, as low as 33 years of life expectancy in women at that time, and the highest life expectancies in the Nordic countries of Europe and Norway with 73, in women, I mean 76, Sweden 76 almost, Iceland 76.3. Those were the countries with highest life expectancy at the time. This was in the 1960s. Let's see what happened, how it evolved. In the 1970s, the region which still lagged behind with very low life expectancy for women was Sub-Saharan Africa. Together with India and Afghanistan, India had a life expectancy for women even below men at 50 years of age. Some of the lowest life expectancies were again in Sierra Leone, with 39 years, 36 years in Mali, and Niger with 37. Basically West Africa with very low life expectancies, together with India and Afghanistan, which barely had 40 years of life expectancy. Also in South Asia, we see very low life expectancy in women, and that was because of the genocide in the 70s. It dropped down to 30 years in Laos as well, and in Papua New Guinea. And it was also quite low in the Americas, in Bolivia, with the lowest life expectancy in the region, 48 years. And those life expectancies were followed by others slightly higher in Central America, in the rest of Africa, and in the Middle East. Again, highest life expectancies took place in Europe. The highest in the world was Iceland. It was followed, as you may see, by Norway, Sweden, Switzerland. So basically European countries, Nordic countries, and Switzerland as the highest, is followed by Japan, which already had a life expectancy for women in the 70s of 76.5. If we progress towards the 80s, we see how still Sub-Saharan Africa has life expectancies for women below 50 years, together with Afghanistan. India has improved slightly to 57 years. It's still very low here in Bhutan and in Nepal, but basically this is the worst off region, followed by regions of countries like Bolivia, India, Papua New Guinea, still Laos and Cambodia, followed by other regions like in the Andean countries, Peru, Central America, Northern Africa, Turkey, Iran, Mongolia, and still the highest levels were in Europe, particularly in the Nordic countries, still with life expectancies surpassing 80 years in Iceland and very close in Sweden and Norway, Finland, also Switzerland, and but already Spain has a very high life expectancy in the 80s, and the highest life expectancy then is already Japan, which will keep its very high life expectancy for women from the 80s till today as the highest life expectancy. In the US, by the way, it was slightly lower, 78 years. And Canada was close to the EU levels, as was Australia and New Zealand. What happened when we get to the end of the century? We see how the life expectancy remains very high, close to 80 in North America, but also Cuba, see it here, Costa Rica, over 80, Panama, also Chile and Uruguay, which had very close to 80 or above 80. Still, the highest life expectancy remains in Japan, but followed by countries in Europe, particularly Norway, Sweden, France with a very high life expectancy, and Spain also. So also very close levels in Australia and in New Zealand. Still very low life expectancy in sub-Saharan Africa, and where we see a change here already in the 90s is a drop of life expectancy in Southern Africa because of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. This area, which was green earlier, begins to have very low life expectancy. It's as low as 45 years in women in Zimbabwe, and starts dropping also in South Africa with 56 years. It also dropped in Russia, as we will see later, down to 72 years, although the drop, as we saw in the other video, was even much abrupt for men. So our Sri Lanka always kept very high levels of life expectancy, despite its GDP being half the world's average. It's close to 78 years. And let's see what happened in the last 2 decades. Gets slightly better in Russia and former Soviet Union, reaches very high levels in Sri Lanka, and joins these very high levels, close to 80 years, in the whole of Europe, Northern America, Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Cuba, and the southern cone of South America, also Australia and New Zealand. Still very low in sub-Saharan Africa, as I said, and even lower in countries badly hit by HIV/AIDS, still picking up, like Zimbabwe, 50 years, and also Botswana and Lesotho, even less than 50 years of life expectancy. India, which has improved slightly, still lagging much behind with 67 years of life expectancy. And this is how it looks today, with much of the American continent quite well off in terms of life expectancy for women, slightly lower in Mexico, only 77.8, and in Bolivia 73, Venezuela 76, but most of the continent with levels above 78. Also, the northern part of Central America is lower than the world average. Still, again, Sub-Saharan Africa as a region with worst life expectancy in general for men and for women, with lowest levels in Central Africa, Nigeria, still Sierra Leone as the worst of country in terms of life expectancy in general, and then areas badly hit by HIV/AIDS which are not recovering. It improved in North Africa and Middle East, and still very high in the whole of Europe, with Spain just after Japan, as you see, and Hong Kong as the highest life expectancy in women. In fact, in the Community of Madrid, they hold the highest levels of life expectancy of any sub-region in the world as recorded. It's also very high in Italy, 85, in Spain, 86.2, in Greece, 84.1, higher than those in Northern Europe, particularly in Germany, 83, Sweden, 84, Norway, 84, the UK, only 83, etc. And still also high in the levels of almost in the Mediterranean levels in Australia and New Zealand, and as I said, Japan with the best life expectancy in women, 87.2. Let's look at how it evolved in some of the most notorious countries, at least in terms of population size. This is how it evolved in Russia. and we see the major drop in the 80s and 90s, and then how it slowly picked up by the turn of the century. This is Russia. Let's see how it evolved in the US as a country with the highest GDP in the world. It increased, but as it increased till the 80s at a good rate, it increased at a much lower rate from the 80s till the turn of the century, and it's almost stagnant in the last 15 years. It even decreased slightly in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years. Sorry. Let's look at another major country like China, and we see a constant growth of life expectancy, particularly in the 60s and the 70s, slower growth thereafter, but we see how it surpasses that of Russia. It gets very close to the one of the US. It's now 78.8 in China, 81.1 in the US. And let's see how India, as the other main populated country in the world, looks like. And it increased. In fact, it departed from a very similar level to China in the 60s, but the growth was much slower. The main, let's say, time where China introduced this gap was in the 60s and the 70s. This is when really it departed from this level. And India has been gradually increasing, but still lagging behind, with levels that are 3-4 years below. In fact, now it's 70 years ago, and it's 15 years below the best levels, and some 10 years below the world average. Let's look at South Africa as well. As the main drop in South Africa. You see it there highlighted in yellow and blue in the 90s because of HIV/AIDS. Let's look at another country with a very good life expectancy, Spain, and how it was always really high, very close to Japan, and is now at a level of 86.2. And as I said, it reaches 88 in women in the Community of Madrid. So this is how it looks like, and the time map of life expectancy and birth in women.